Hi everyone, welcome to this evening's RC Expert. My name is Paula Hanford. I am the CEO of PSC Support. Just wanted to say that all of these webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to watch any webinars we've had previously, please go onto our channel. Or if you want to re-watch this, if there's something that you didn't quite pick up when this webinar is over, then this webinar will be on our YouTube channel as well in about a week's time. So this session is a little different from our previous sessions, which have been very much focused on the medical side or the research side of PSC or having a transplant. We're trying some more practical sessions based on your feedback, really. So we hope this, this ticks the box. This is what you want, and we'd be delighted to hear from any feedback from this session. So tonight we are joined and delighted to be joined by one of PSC Support's trustees, Charlene Oke. Charlene is an established global HR practitioner, what it says on this slide, with over 15 years experience across many different industries, several industries. She's going to talk to us tonight about the topic of managing a chronic condition like PSC in your workplace. And it's a topic we regularly get asked about, questions we get asked about. Charlene's going to present and then we will take questions. So please put your questions into the Q&A section on Zoom, and you can put them in at any time while she's speaking, after she's speaking, throughout the whole webinar, and we will come to them and hopefully take every single question that's asked. We'll see how we do with time. So Charlene, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And would you like to start your presentation?
Thank you so much, Paula, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. So thank you all for having me, and kind of feel like I'm earning my HR trustee position by doing this session tonight. So as Paula said, if you have any questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer those. I just wanted to say that, in terms of, yes, I've got great employment law background. As Paula mentioned, I've been a practitioner in HR well over 15. It's probably more over 20. But with that said, I'm not an employment lawyer, so it's really important that you sort of bear that in mind, which is why I put a bit of a disclaimer up. So yes, I will be taking lots of information from trustworthy sources such as ACAS, and I'll tell you who they are a bit later, and other places such as DirectGov and CIPD. So those are all reputable places that you can get employment law information, workers' rights, etc. So I'm just sort of taking some of those elements and sharing those with you, but I am not in any space an employment lawyer, so I just needed to share that with you. So we're here tonight to talk about managing chronic conditions in the workplace, but I thought it would be good to just kind of get a bit of a landscape on where we are. And I do know, and I'm very aware, that as PSC patients and supporters and advocates, this can be a space where you feel quite alone. And I really want to tell you tonight that you're not alone in terms of, yes, maybe in terms of the specific condition. I know that there's only sort of 10,000 or so people that are suffering currently from PSC, although that's estimated. But it's also really to sort of reaffirm that we're in this landscape around the fact that millions of us live with different forms of types of disability that show up in us in very different ways. And really, it's important for us to sort of put that into perspective, but equally for employers to put that into perspective, that lots of us do have hidden disabilities. And so whilst the symptoms, I guess, around PSC and other disabilities that we might have are not overtly seen straight away in some situations, it's important to know that, Scope and other disability charities, and also the government, of course, have recognized that many people do sort of suffer and have lots of conditions that they have to manage. So it's really better for us to be in a better position that we can support people with long-term conditions. And how do we do that in the place of work? So I just wanted to touch a little bit on where our protections are. So, you know, there is an Equality Act that was brought in 2010 that sort of replaces previous discrimination law, if you like. And those laws really help you protect you from discrimination in the workplace. So employees with long-term health conditions are protected under this legislation, but also Health and Safety at Work Act as well. So when we're thinking about discrimination, all we're really saying is that everybody has the right to not to be treated less favorably than somebody else. And this type of legislation, although we're specifically talking about disability tonight, it covers a range of different protected characteristics as they're known. So that's age, that's disability, it could be marriage, it could be race, it could be around pregnancy. There's loads of different protected characteristics that it covers. But in respect of our conversation this evening, really we're just focusing on the disability element of it. And so, as you can see here, it really sort of sets out, you can Google the act if you want to, it's quite a meaty act. So I'd say, you know, kind of stick to the headlines, but the law really talks about you can be, I hate to use the word label, but you can be considered as somebody disabled if you have both of these elements. So one is talking about that physical or mental impairment, and the other one is about an impairment that has substantial and long-term adverse effect on their ability to carry out their normal day-to-day activities. So when we're thinking about this on a PSC lens, that's kind of what we're looking at here. You know, you don't have to be diagnosed as yet. You might not fully know the extent of your PSC condition. You might be still you might actually have a number of other hidden conditions as well. So what we're talking about here is that you are included and you would be protected because this is really something about the impact on long term on your ability to do day-to-day activities. And as it says here, it doesn't have to be substantial. So a question that I hear a lot, especially in my line of work, but also if you were to go onto the PSC website, it does say that I actually also have an autoimmune condition. So I'm very, this topic is very close to my heart as well. And I have my own personal experiences. But a question here is, do you have to tell your employer about your condition? And in one short answer, no, you don't have to. It's your legal right. If you want to keep that protected to yourself, then of course you should do and you can do. The thing is here is that if you don't tell your employer about your condition, then it kind of sort of prevents, if you like, them taking some responsibility to support you. But the minute that you do mention it or you do say, it is their legal responsibility to ensure that you get the best support possible within the workplace. So I know there are lots of things around people feeling fearful about wanting to disclose or worried about if they would face any repercussions from saying to their manager that they do have a long-term health condition. And of course, as I said, you don't have to say, but it's really important that if we want to be in a position to help people, then when you feel that the time is right, because you might actually just be really struggling with coming to terms with your new diagnosis, or you know, there might be other things that you're going on that you might not be ready to say, but when you are, it's really important that you do. Equally, if you're coming from a lens around, as I said, if you're not yet diagnosed, or if you're actually a parent or a carer, again, it's the same premise. You can keep this information private. You know, legally, nobody has to tell their employer that they have a disability or they have a long-term condition. But the same thing really applies here. It's that, in a sense, if we are talking about the fact that you might be out of the organization because you're unwell, or you might be supporting somebody that's unwell, that's going to have an impact on your day-to-day working life. And of course, employers love to ask questions and they love to sort of monitor your performance. So if you're in a position where your performance is being impacted, I would encourage you, sensitively, of course, to share that, because then that allows them to be fully transparent with what is on the table, and then they have legal obligations to really support you with, and we'll talk about what those are shortly. But it's definitely, I'd say, more of a win to disclose because it kind of sets the scene of how they're going to actually support you and what do they need to do. And of course, this is also going to help towards eliminating a lot of stigma around disclosing, on having that trust, disclosing those elements that are personal to you. I love this slide. I hate to say that I love this slide, but I think it really depicts what many of us who either have PSC or have other disabilities or hidden disabilities, the kind of minefield that we kind of go through. And we do all of this in secret. So if you think, well, actually, I haven't disclosed to my manager or my supervisor, or I haven't said anything to anyone at work about what I'm actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis, this is a great way to kind of showcase this. And what we're saying here is that this is a day-to-day reality for many of us. And what we're saying is that this on top of actually having your condition is a full-time job on top of doing your job. So you might need to have time for some grace. You might need to have time to manage your fatigue. You might need to have time to do all of those things, with them making appointments, following up, going for your MRIs, going for your anything that is associated with your condition can really have an impact on your daily life and, of course, planning. And so all I'm saying here is that it's important that we take stock of all of those things and that they do have an impact. And you're absolutely right to acknowledge these and also plan and have space so that you can attend all of these appointments and keep up with your care, because that's vital. I put a term on here that many people might not know, and the term is called microaggressions. But what I like to kind of call them is sort of subtle acts of exclusion. So for many of you who are in this realm and having to daily kind of justify how you approach work, or justify the fact that you might not even be feeling so great, but you're dragging yourself to work, to get the job done. And you have to literally deal with, sadly, sometimes really inappropriate comments that kind of come your way, and because of your condition, and because of the things that you might be sort of managing out of line of sight, it can get really overwhelming. So I really want to kind of say that I completely understand that. I acknowledge that. And I guess when we're in a position that you feel comfortable to disclose, it's also a way of saying to your manager or to your supervisor or to whoever that actually sometimes these comments may pop up. And also it's important that we have allies, if you like, with our managers, have that person to really support you, so that if there are others that are questioning, why is Susie off today? She was okay yesterday, or, you don't look very disabled, like what's wrong with you type thing, very intrusive questions. It's important that you have somebody else who's in the room or there to be able to sort of really support you and be an ally. So it's important that we take stock that these microaggressions, as they're called, they're defined as something really subtle, but they can really be traumatizing, especially if you have to hear this constantly. So it's just a signpost to remind you all that if you are hearing these things, you're not going mad. It's not something that you're making up. They are real, and they definitely have an emotional impact to it. When we think about your relationship with your manager or with your supervisor, or equally, speaking, as a parent and you're caring for somebody, or it might be, you might be caring for one of your siblings or another parent even. It's important that when you get into that zone, when you are ready to disclose, word trust and empathy often pops up a lot, and these are really quite impactful words. And what I want to say here is that it's pivotal when you want to disclose that information, that you want to be able to do it with your manager or with your supervisor, that you feel that actually, if I share this, they're really going to take this on board. I'm not going to feel any kind of repercussions. I'm not going to feel like I'm going to be punished or humiliated for speaking up or for sharing these personal journeys that you might be going on. And this is where the term psychological safety sort of comes up. And Professor Amy Edmondson came up with the term that really covers that you should be free to be yourself, and you should be free to be able to share really personal things that are happening with you, because that's part of you. That's what makes you unique. Sadly, as you can imagine, being in, whether you work for a small business or a large corporate, managers up and down the country, some of them are really good and get this and understand how to create an environment that's really inclusive and allows you to feel that you can be yourself and share things that are impacting you. And sadly, there are others that are not so good at it. And so it's really important that we understand that this is a reciprocal arrangement. You do have to be in a space where you feel like you can share, but also when you have shared, the response that you get back from that has to be wholesome, has to be in that direction that you really want to take it in. So again, in your own time, at your own pace, share your stories, share where you're at, be honest, so that we can have that level of transparency. But sadly, I'm under no illusion that, or fairy tale, that managers are, genuinely empathetic. Some find that really harder than others. And I've just slipped this in here before we talk about some of the unique, I guess, terms or rights, if you like, when it relates to disability and those protections that we spoke about earlier. But I did want to sort of shine the light on empathy. And for me, I think sometimes even in this role that I'm in and wider things that we get involved in, we do sometimes get drawn in to be sat in judgment. But when we're thinking about what empathy really is about, it's not sympathy. It's very, very different. And if we are in a position where we can share our story and share our journey with our manager and really get the support that we need, if they are being empathetic, they're feeling with that connection, they're feeling that human connection with you. And whilst they might not have any clue how, the real impact that PSC might have on you, they can empathize with you. They can truly be an ally. They can be a person that really recognizes those emotions that you might be going through and be able to be there to support. And sometimes it's just a simple thing of, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that today you're feeling, extra levels of fatigue, or I'm so sorry that your biopsy didn't go well, or whatever it is. And it's a case of, I don't even know the right words to share with you, but I'm here. I'm here and I want to support you. And this is kind of the environment that we definitely want to create. And so if you get any time, you can also Google Dr. Brené Brown. She's done a lot of research in this area about empathy and emotional intelligence and vulnerability. So good to kind of sort of help to lay that groundwork. So hopefully that our, your supervisors and your managers can try and connect in that way too. So on screen here, I've got lots of orange boxes. I'm not sure why I chose orange, but there are a number of elements that you might not even think come into play when you might not even consider yourself actually even as disabled. But as I mentioned earlier, having PSC or having any other sort of hidden disability that's not quite seen to the naked eye, if you are in a situation where, this is a long-term condition, then these things would apply to you. So I don't want you to think, well, I do have PSC, but I don't consider myself disabled. I think the law would definitely argue that the impact on your condition has on your lifestyle and has on your day-to-day activities would say different. So I've got a number of boxes on here and I'll go through them individually. And as I said, many of us work for different organizations, so you might actually find that you do have a policy on some of these things, and that's great. And I would encourage you to sort of go in that direction if you're unsure. Some businesses may not have all of those kind of frameworks in place. And if that's the case, sadly, then you might have to refer to some of the other websites and places of information that you can get, where you can get a baseline, because from a government perspective or a statutory perspective, many of these things will still apply to you. So I'll go through them individually. So first of all, when it comes to sickness and absence policies, I think that's something that's as I said, quite standard. Most organisations would have something in place, but if they don't, fear not, DirectGov and ACAS can definitely help here. But this policy would really sort of set out what are the needs for this individual in terms of reporting sickness and absence and managing your condition in that way. And, if you don't have a policy, then it's really important that you ask your employer, like, what type of leave to use if you are going to be absent from work due to your condition. And of course, employees with long-term health conditions may have to take, of course, as we know, multiple absences, and that can fluctuate over time. You can never really kind of say exactly how many absences they might be. So in the case of sickness and absence, it's really important that there is flexibility, and that your your absences relating to your condition is managed with a much more sort of individualized and sensitive approach. So may not necessarily be the same, or if you like, judged in the same or managed in the same context as somebody else who doesn't have a disability. So it's important to sort of pick that up on there. When we talk about payments, again, this can vary. So legally, everybody would have access to statutory sick pay, and there are some conditions that will exclude individuals from that, potentially if they haven't worked in the organisation for a certain amount of time and so forth. But if you find out that you're not eligible, then your manager or your employer has to explain to you why. They have to give you a reason why you wouldn't be eligible for SSP, as it's known. So that's called statutory sick pay. And the minimum amount, that's the minimum amount that an employer can pay. Equally, some employers might have some enhanced provisions or enhanced policies, and sometimes they would have company sick pay. So that would normally sort of equate to your daily rate of pay, for example. Again, I can't comment individually on what that looks like for everybody because that will be different, but it's worth checking out to see, if you haven't already, what kind of policies are in place. And of course, there are some stipulations around how much of those days, if it was company sick pay, that you would be allowed or given, should we say. So I think the last time I checked, SSP is around £109.40 a week, and you need to be off for at least 4 qualifying days of being unwell in order to obtain the SSP, if you like. Of course, for company sick pay, there are different provisions that might be in place. You'd have to check individually, really, with your employer. Again, why am I sharing this? It's good to kind of know that you might have some level of comfort, although not much with statutory sick pay, but at least you'd know that if you are absent from work for any period of time, that there should be some level of monetary coverage for that period of time of you being absent. Fit notes, I'm sure that many of us are aware of, or at least may have seen one. And these notes are usually given by your GP or your consultant, and they're really a valid source of legal information that confirms that you're not fit to work. And what I want to say here in big capitals, red letters, if you've been signed off from work, please do not work. I'll say that again. If you've been signed off from your consultant or from your GP and you've got one of these fit notes that says, Erica is not fit to work today, or Steve is not fit to work for a period of time, then please don't decide that you're going to just log on and do a couple of emails, or, there's this presentation that you need to finish, or there's this site that you need to visit. If they're saying that you're not fit to work, then don't work. And when you do work, when you're not supposed to, if you've got a fit note that covers that period, it really blurs the line of that legality, that support that you're supposed to receive, because then it makes the employer think, well, they're off sick, so yeah, but they can still do a few emails. No, be really, really set those boundaries. If you are feeling better and you want to return to work before the fit note has ended, that's okay. But I would say go back to your GP or your consultant so that they feel comfortable that you are ready to return back to work, and they would reissue or amend the fit note to suit that period of time. So yes, please do not work if you've already been signed off, unless the fit note does say I think there's a box on there that says you can do sort of adjusted duties. If that's ticked and it says you can work, but there are certain stipulations that need to be, adjustments that need to be made, then that's okay as well. In terms of having time off for appointments, again, sometimes people do have specific time, have a policy, others don't. I would say the rule of thumb here is that, if you're going to take some time off for an appointment, whether it's, a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment or anything like that, there is provisions legally that you can take this time off. The provisions change or can be different per employer in terms of whether you're paid for that time. So some employers might say, well, actually, if you're going to be off just for a morning, just to go and get blood tests done, for example, or to go and pick up your prescription or go to the dentist, that's fine. That's going to be an hour, 2 hours max, no problem. See you when you get back. Others can be a bit more prescriptive and say, right, well, I prefer if you can work the time that you're absent back. So, that time is covered. Or some might say, actually, if you're going to be gone for half a day, for example, because you've got to do a colonoscopy or you've got to do an MRI or something, then actually you might need to take the half the day off. And that could be classed as your sick leave, potentially, to take that leave off. So always check with your employer around what leave is appropriate and what is their best practice, or what you take the lead from them on how you should take those time off for those appointments as well. But you're definitely allowed to have that time. Just want to make that clear. In terms of time off for dependents, and some might say, oh goodness, I don't know what's classified as a dependent. By law, anyone legally classed as an employee, I might add, can take time off to help with a dependent such as their spouse or their civil partner, their child, their parent who might live with them or may not live with them, but still parents are covered. They also, or maybe it could be a relative, such as an auntie or an uncle, but also anyone that might have somebody, it might be a neighbor, for example, that's heavily reliant on your support for an example. In those situations, that is covered under the Employment Law Rights Act of 1996. And again, the law doesn't really say how much time you're allowed to take or how many occasions of leave you're allowed to have. But what they do say, and they say throughout all bits of legislation, is the word reasonable. So reasonable can be interpreted in a plethora of different ways. But I'd say take your guidance from what your employer best practice, what do they actually do in that situation. But it's just to let you know that if you are looking after somebody else, there are provisions around taking leave that support you to do that. Reasonable adjustments, I will sort of go into a little bit more detail in a little bit, but ideally what we're talking about here is that what considered as reasonable, again, is in that bracket of what kind of changes an organization can make, and what is determined by those is a number of different elements that we'll discuss on the next slide. But I put it here because it's important that we get used to those terms, and they are terms that would apply to you in the case of having PSC, because you would need to make some adjustments if, for example, your condition was progressing, or if you needed to be in a position to have some more support. So it's important to cover that. And then, of course, the Equality Act, as I mentioned earlier, is that protection around discrimination and, of course, unfair dismissal from work as well. So ideally, all I'm saying here is that they wouldn't be able to select you solely on the basis that you might have a disability to, end your contract or terminate your employment. There's quite a few things here on screen. I'm not going to go into explaining them all individually, but this is just to kind of say to you all that when we talk about reasonable adjustments, that's what the law calls them. I like to call them inclusive adjustments. These are really just core elements that can really support you in your work if you need them. So if you've had conversations with your consultant or your GP, and we'll talk about occupational health on the next slide, they might actually come up with a number of different things that says, right, okay, you know, you've had a period of time off of work because you've been, you know, you might be newly diagnosed, or you might be having a flare, or you might be, you know, about to undergo surgery, and post-surgery kind of what happens. We have to be in a position to think about different ways to accommodate that. So that could be a phased return. That could mean that in your particular case, you suffer terrible fatigue more in the morning than you do in the afternoon. So maybe we can sort of adjust your timings of when you start and when you finish. Of course, remote working kind of feels like a given at the moment, considering where we are. But for some roles, it isn't. So maybe it might be something that could be considered. Same thing around, you know, having the right technology. Certainly in my case, I had to have additional equipment that allows me not to use my hands so much, so that I could speak, and the equipment could actually then create, be able to, you know, type in the words for me. So these could be a range of different things. One thing that I will point out here is about the realignment of your objectives. So most organizations, you would have a standard set of objectives that you're supposed to do in order to complete your role. Perfectly normal. But you might find that actually, because of the impact of your condition, that you're not able to do all of those things in the same way. So it might be a case of sort of reevaluating them, or maybe even looking at other roles that you potentially could do, if the role that you currently did was overly physical, or something that doesn't necessarily really allow you to do your best work. So all of those things could be a conversation, or several conversations, I might add, to be considered. So again, these are just some examples of reasonable adjustments.
Charlene, sorry to interrupt you. We're
Sure.
just gone 7:30, so just want to make sure we have enough time for questions at the end.
Yes, we will do. I'm going to wrap up shortly. Thank you. So I mentioned the term occupational health before, and some organizations, quite large ones, tend to have an OH sort of remit, and really occupational health is there to give that support around almost being an intermediary, if you like. So somebody that would understand, have a medical background, and have some level of understanding around your condition, but also understands maybe the needs of the business as well. So they'd be able to give a really good balanced approach around how we can make the right adjustments for you. What support do you need? What can the business do to really allow you to continue working the best way you can? Sometimes these are internal, and sometimes these are external as well. This one is really just to say that having a long-term condition is really emotional. It can be really emotional. You'll go through so many different waves of coming to terms with your condition, or not. You know, where do you get that support? Of course, I'm sure many of us do have lots of people in our network, friends, family, that can help and offer that listening ear. Sometimes you might want to have a different listening ear, because friends and family often like to give advice and they don't always know how you really feel. And so they probably, without them realizing it, are more giving sympathy rather than empathy. But it's important that you nurture your mental health and look after that as you would your physical health. So please find ways to, whether, you know, talking therapies is a great one. Up and down the country, there's different elements that can support that. Think about your energy level. So that's the spoon theory. If you Google that, that really talks about how many spoons do you need each day to really support you, and in terms of energy wise. And if you think that you've used too much energy for the day, then that will allow you to think about what you've got to do for the whole week, for example. And Mind, we'll send out the link for these as well. Mind has the charity Mind has a great action plan around wellness. So you can go in there and put in different elements that suit you, and they can come up with a nice action plan to help support you emotionally. In terms of the workplace, here really this is just giving some examples of what some workplaces might offer. Again, this will vary. And really, it's just to kind of spark your thoughts and really do some investigating on whether there is anything private healthcare wise that's offered that can support you, or even around employee assistance program that's really just an external business, normally linked to insurers, that they have counsellors and therapists on hand 24/7, 365. So again, have a look to see if some of your businesses do have some of these resources that you can use. And the final one here before I wrap up and talk about some tips, this I'll definitely share with you, and you can have the links. But of course, having a disability is a minefield, and there is lots of things out there that can really support you. So whether that's, getting that advice, as I mentioned, via ACAS or Citizens Advice or Direct Gov, it could be very linked around transportation. So, would I be eligible for a blue badge? I didn't think I would be because of my condition. All of these links here would take you to the right places where you can sort of investigate and get some further information. But this is to let you know that they do exist, and you can get an opportunity to see if they can be supported. The same with the personal independence payments as well. Again, this replaces the disability allowance, and it really gives an opportunity for individuals to see if there is some financial aid or support that they can have. And the final one on here about access to work, again, this is a service provided by the government, and essentially what they do is they sort of come in, assess have a conversation with you or a couple, and then they're able to suggest to your employer maybe some of those additional reasonable adjustments that might need to be made. And of course, PSC, without saying. So in wrapping up, lots of information I've covered tonight. Really, just be honest with yourself in terms of how you're feeling. And really, if you think that you're in a safe place that you can disclose to your employer, then I would really encourage you to do so that you can get the right support. Find that balance, because working, sadly, many of us have to work for, I think it's 71 now or 70. We've got to work for a long time. So we've got to find that right balance. And if we do have a long-term condition, it means that we're going to be working and managing that for a while as well. And I just say, prepare for days that you're going to be unwell as best as you can. Be familiar with your policies that you might have in the workplace, and really make sure that you update your next of kin and your contact details as well, just in case of anything that might come up and you may need to contact. It's one of the main things that sometimes gets missed. And I've come to the end. Question time.
Thank you so much, Charlene.
No problem.
That really informative, and I'm sure that everybody listening has too. I've got a few questions, so I'll ask them.
Sure.
And this one I think is particularly important for those starting new jobs, and I think most people can resonate with this question actually. So the poster has said, I recently started a new job for a small organisation working fully remotely and didn't disclose my PSC diagnosis because I feared I wouldn't get the job. I'm sure we could all empathise with that. I don't have symptoms all the time, but I've told my employer whenever I was unwell, and they've been very understanding. But I'm worried about the longer term perspective because there's no one else who can do my job when I'm off sick. Would revealing my diagnosis give me greater protection? And I think there is that thing about, being a new employee, not going over that 2-year, sort of landmark, isn't there? What sort of, rights do they have? That's probably another question actually. But would revealing my diagnosis give me a greater protection, or would it cause problems because I didn't mention it when I applied for the job or since then?
Yeah. Really good question. I completely understand the quandary that you'd be in. And as you said, many people have thought about this or been in that situation. So thank you for the question. I would say that disability discrimination or employment, the Equality Act, if you like, so all of those things that I mentioned in the beginning, you're kind of covered from that from day one. So you've got PSC. As you said, your condition is fluctuating, so you're not all the time unwell, but you have periods where you are. So it doesn't matter that you've only been into the organization for a short period of time. From a legal perspective, it can impact your day-to-day life. So I would strongly argue that PSC would be something that would be considered, if you like, under the Disability Act or Equality Act. So if you feel comfortable, I would disclose and kind of just say, look, you know, I have good days, I have days that I'm not so good, and there's days where I can't work for XYZ reasons. So the more you're transparent about what's happening to you, as I said earlier, the more that would allow them to recognize that they do have to make adaptations and they do have to think about the provisions that they're putting in place to support you. So I would say it's a good thing to share, but when you're ready.
The poster has said, you know, would it cause problems because I didn't mention it when I applied for the job? And I think
No.
many people think that, but you said at the beginning of your presentation that wouldn't.
No.
You can disclose or not disclose.
Absolutely. Because in the end, employers can only make decisions based on what they know. And if they are not in the know that you do have PSC, they can only make judgments on your performance, you know, without knowing that. But if they do know that, they can take that into consideration. And of course, as I said, all of the other things around reasonable adjustments, they would have to make those provisions in place for you. So I would say, when you're ready, definitely disclose. And they won't penalize you for not saying in the beginning, especially because I'm sure they would understand that many people do feel quite sensitive around sharing that when starting a new job.
Yeah, and the next question actually is very similar, but I will read it out. If applying for a new job, when would you recommend is the best time to disclose? I think that's up to the individual, probably you'll say, but in that process, before or after the job offer has been made, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's heavily weighted on when you feel like it's the appropriate time. I mean, for me, if we lived in a inclusive utopia, then you would say it from the jump. But I get it. I get why people don't say it in the beginning. But I think if you've been given the offer and you've, you know, they clearly want you to start, they're enthusiastic about you coming on board, you've got lots of things to bring to the table, I would say you disclose when you feel that it's the time. But I would say maybe sooner rather than later, so that again, they can make informed decisions. And if you do feel that there is some kind of repercussions from you saying it, as I said, you've got some protections that can help support you with that.
Sure. And this, I've got another question actually that relates to moving jobs or getting a new job.
Yeah.
I'll be applying for jobs. So the poster said, I've been applying for jobs in roughly a year's time. So obviously they're planning on that. I'm a priest in the Church of England, and I have to agree for their advisors to access and provide a report of medical records. What would you say if whoever reports my medical records raises alarm bells? Again, I can empathize with this. I'm currently symptom free. I'd hate to be turned down for a job because someone reads my records and writes me off.
Yeah, again, you know, especially in that space around, you know, going for new jobs and getting new talent on board, they cannot legally decide that you're not the right person because they have discovered, because you've had to, you know, give these medical reports, that you do have a condition. If they make that decision, that's illegal. They cannot be in that, you know, in that situation to say, well, no, you can't get this job because. Of course, they might be clever and come up with other reasons why you wouldn't be suitable, but absolutely, your medical diagnosis should have no bearing on whether you can do the job or not.
That's great advice. This question is about, well, I'll read it. My workplace has arranged a workplace adjustment passport to assist. However, due to sickness within the office, it's not being adhered to. What should I do?
Workplace assist. So is this kind of like a policy that gives people support in terms of? I kind of need a little more info. I'm not sure how to answer. Sorry.
Yeah. Workplace adjustment passport to assist. That's not a.
I've not heard of that before, but then lots of companies use lots of different terminologies. I mean, look, if it's not being adhered to, that's unfortunate. But in the end, this is sort of an individual experience. So if it needs to be adhered to in your case, then you need to then express that and kind of work within the provisions with whether, however this access support is supposed to work for you, without kind of knowing the ins and outs. That's probably the best that I could say. So yes, if it's something that they have as guidance or as policy, then they should be adhering to it, and you can reinforce that.
I presume that's what you'd raise it with.
Yes, absolutely. So speak to your manager or speak to someone in HR if you do have a HR function.
Thank you. This is a question about access to work. So I know you mentioned that. Can people with fatigue claim funding for support under it, or is it just for physical impairments?
No, so it covers a range, actually. There is a whole long list. So with access to work, they would evaluate everybody's application individually. So they'll go through it, they'll have a conversation with you about how you're feeling, the impact. They kind of do a little bit of a scoring system as well, a bit like the personal independence payments as well. And then they'll come back with a report that they would share with you and share with your employer around, okay, these are some of the things that we would suggest. And they would then, the government would then provide, if you needed, say, I don't know, specific software, or if you needed more time. I'm not sure how it works in terms of time to manage fatigue in that example, but they would come up with whatever they think is appropriate or suitable. And of course, yes, the government would then provide that grant to the business to allow that to happen. So yeah, it covers a range of things, but I would say go through, if you're eligible and you'd like to explore that, then definitely go on to the provisions with access report, and there are links that we can share as well.
Thank you very much. Somebody's asking about Brené Brown. Can you I love Brené Brown, by the way, so thanks.
She's amazing.
She is amazing. Can you recommend any books by her?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question, and my brain is now suddenly gone blank. But
I watched TED Talks by her.
Yes, she's got great TED Talks, but actually she's got a video that I actually share in my organization very often when we're doing allyship sessions. And the video, if you just literally Google Brené Brown empathy, it kind of looks a little bit like a cartoon. It's probably only like 3 minutes and some long, but it really characterizes those 4 points in an amazing way. And every time people watch it, they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even think about that, or that really resonates with me. So yeah, pop in anything that she's done around vulnerability, emotional intelligence, empathy. Those are really good books. I don't have one to my brain at the moment, but I love all of her stuff.
She is absolutely brilliant. Couple of more questions. We've got time for a few more questions, actually. Anybody else?
That's good.
Yeah, put them in the Q&A section. I've been using my annual leave for my regular doctor appointments. Is there a better way? Because I'm running out of leave.
Again, I'd have to I think because you're using your leave for doctor's appointments, it probably means that there might be no other types of leave that you could use at work. So in that situation, it might mean that you'd have to take unpaid leave. Again, most organizations approach this so differently. So some would be like, if you're only going to the doctors for an hour or 2, it's okay. You wouldn't need to book time off per se. Some would say no, we'd prefer if you work back the time. But if you are running out, I mean, try, and of course financially it's so hard because you want to be sort of paid for that time. But I think if you have disclosed that you have a condition, then again, I think there's some conversations that can be had around whether they allow a certain amount of time for you to take for your appointments. Again, legally, they don't have to be paid, but maybe there is something around having that conversation to see if there's something else that could be done. So apologies on that.
Thanks, Charlene. I have a question here. I have disclosed PSC and did reduce my working hours due to fatigue. My illness is progressing. Should I disclose the changes? Although the changes are not currently affecting my performance, just worried that they may reduce my hours due to disease progression.
I think if you're competent and comfortable, and there is no impact on your performance, then there's no real reason for them to reduce your hours further. So I think that's one point to make clear, unless it was the case that, I don't know, they're looking at this from a more organizational perspective and it wasn't just you, for example. I would say yes, it's probably a good idea, as they already know and are already aware, to let them know that things are progressing. And I don't know what you might have shared with them before. Some people like to share, you know, their consultant reports or things that, you know, that have come through that they want to share with their manager. Others would prefer not to. But again, if you've got an occupational health support in work, or if you do already sharing that information, I would say it's good for them to have an awareness so that they can also help to support you and be prepared for when, you know, things are going to get a little bit more trickier for you to manage. But I'd say at the moment, there would be no reason, if your performance isn't impacted, there would be no reason for them to suggest that more time is taking off for you to do your work.
They got a legal right to do that, Charlene, if they thought to reduce your hours.
No, well, they'd have to consult with you. And as I said, having the fact that the disability has been disclosed, you know, they can't be in a position to cause an employee detriment, if you like. So it's really important that there has to be some levels of discussion, some levels of consultation, if you like. And as I said, if your performance isn't really being impacted, then it goes back to that question as to why. So as long as if they can provide reasons, as I said, if it's more overall business decisions that they need to do that, fine. And you're not the only person that's being impacted, fine. But if your consultant, if your GP, if, you know, other medical professionals say that, you know, where you're working at the moment and the timeframes that you're working is okay, then that should be enough.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah.
You mentioned working from home.
I did.
Many of us do that these days.
Indeed.
But what if somebody has been told now they have to go back into the office, or they're back in the office? Do they have the right to work from home whenever they want?
Oh, this could easily be somebody from my business. Good question. And again, I'd have to strongly go back to, well, what is your current situation? What have you disclosed? Where they are with your support? As I said, it can be considered as a reasonable adjustment. Of course, I know that many organizations do want to get employees back into the working space, you know, to help with collaboration and so forth. And maybe there is an agreement that can be made in terms of, if the general population is that they have to come in 3 days, and maybe you're 2 or 1. So maybe this is, you know, a definite conversation to have. But of course, in the forefront, your condition has to take priority. So, you know, if your consultant is saying, actually, no, I really think that this, you know, this individual is suitable for home-based working because of XYZ, then they would need to take that into consideration. But I would say, first of all, have a conversation around what would be the reasonable adjustments that they would suggest that they can make in that case.
Somebody has said that Dare to Lead is a Brené Brown book. So,
oh, there you go.
I'm
go for it.
I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, you should.
I am. Yeah. Thank you for that. So this is going to be our last question for this evening, and it is this: is there something called disability days? And are these different from sick days? This could be, I don't know, this could be something that's just in specific workplaces. For example, having 2 days off for a colonoscopy, as I have UC as well, I don't want these days to go against my sickness record related to disability.
Yes, again, some organizations just use slightly different terms. So, you know, and those disability days might be their way of framing that as time off for appointments or time off to leave for appointments, for example. So, no, it shouldn't go against your sick leave, because these are actually appointments. You're not actually unwell as such in that moment that you need to have time out of the business. It's because you need to attend an appointment that's been scheduled. So yeah, it shouldn't have an impact. But again, I think you just need to get clarity around what do they say these disability days are exactly for, and be clearer around what your sickness and absence policy says. But I'd probably infer from that they shouldn't be counted. It shouldn't be an impact on your sickness and absence count.
I'm going to squeeze one more question in.
Of course you can, no problem.
3 minutes. I'm sure you can do it. Should I be worried about taking more individual sick days when I feel tired rather than sickness in a big block? So I know that people are worried about this, how many times they can be sick. Should I be more worried about these individual sick days?
Yeah, again, there has to be a conversation around what are the requirements that are, if you like, the triggers, if you like, or how your sickness and absence is going to be managed as it relates to your disability. So again, that's going to be really different to somebody else. And I wouldn't say that you should be more worried if it's one-off days versus a long period, but I would say make sure that you're always clear around what they understand your illness to be, the impact, and also what are the boundaries that they set in terms of those days. Because if they say you've got a certain amount of days that you're allowed, if you like, in a short period of time, then you have an awareness of that. Or if they say, well, actually, no, we're going to relax this, we're going to be a bit more sensitive, we're going to be a bit more flexible, they would take those into consideration. So I'd say have the conversation, but I would say don't be automatically worried about those one-offs.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you, Charlene, for joining us tonight.
No problem.
It's
been a pleasure.
Tonight. I think, I mean, for me, that was a really informative session, and I hope the people that have attended the webinar have found that too. I'm sure they have. And for all of you who have attended, thank you so much for asking your questions. And I do hope it's answered them for you as well. I just want to mention the next Ask the Expert, which is taking place on the 19th again, but the 19th of March this time at 5:30 in the evening. Now we're trying, it's a new time for us. Don't think we've done 5:30, or we certainly haven't done 5:30 for a long time, but it's with Dr. Palak Trivedi, which many of you would know. And it's the title is PSC Research. My child has just closed the cupboard there. I don't know if you could hear it. PSC Research, and it's about the Fargo trial, which is very exciting trial that's currently taking place. So we hope that you would join us for that. But thank you so much, Charlene, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. And I hope you have a nice rest of the evening.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Lovely to talk to you all. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.